Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our viewers, wherever you may be. I am Monica Scatasta, and I'm the Director of Technical Assessment and Monitoring at the Council of Europe Development Bank, or as I will call it from now on, CEB. And at CEB, we are delighted to welcome all of you and to this session that is focusing on social investment, which is part of the activities of the Coalition for Social Investment that we are proud to co-chair with Agence Française de Développement. So today, with our distinguished speakers, our guests, and with all of you, we will address how we can scale up financing for social investment, and especially how we can enhance its impacts on the ground through better design, better implementation, and also through the engagement and involvement of final beneficiaries and other stakeholders. But why do we need to focus on doing more and doing better in social investment? The climate crisis is a social crisis. Climate change impacts can worsen social inequalities and, in fact, do have an especially heavy impact on the most vulnerable group in society. And in turn, social inequalities can weaken the capacity of societies to react both to the climate crisis, but to emergencies of any nature. So this nexus and these intensifying and interrelated structural challenges are setting us back in the progress towards achieving the SDGs, and we've seen indeed the Human Development Index decline for the first time in 2020. So to respond to these challenges, that's why we're here today. We need vision, we need leadership, we need strategies, but we also need investment. And yet, underinvestment in social infrastructure remains a persistent issue in Europe and worldwide. And so recently, the EU Porto Summit, the G7, the G20 are all calling for more financing for the social sector. And global problems also require local solutions. We've heard it at the G20 high-level conference on local infrastructure, which called us to rethink our investment priorities and focus on subnational entities' priorities. So as public development banks, we're here and we can be a bridge. We can be a bridge between global challenges and local solutions. But we cannot do it alone, and that's why we need collective solutions. So today we're here to discuss all of that, and I am really delighted to introduce to you our four distinguished speakers, starting from my right, your left, I guess, on the screen, Katarína Mathernová, Deputy Director General for the European Commission Directorate General for Neighbourhood and Enlargement, DG NEAR. And now on the screen, in the order in which they will speak, I'm delighted to welcome Masood Ahmed, President of the Center for Global Development, CGD, and members of the G20 High-Level Independent Panel on Financing the Global Commons for Pandemic Preparedness and Response. Usha Rao-Monari, whom I am delighted to see again, Undersecretary General and Associate Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, and finally, Börü, CEO of the Industrial Development Bank of Turkey, TSKB, or TSKB, and Vice Chair also of the International Development Finance Club. So we're going to start with Katarína, and we start with our first session on underfinancing of social investment and its consequences, setting the stage. So, Katarína, what is the Commission's vision on the social and climate nexus, and what are the recent or upcoming EU policy development that may support social investment?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the panel. It's great to meet virtually the co-panelists, and I think very much liked what you said, that the environmental or climate crisis is a social crisis. And it's something that sounds almost intuitive, should be something that policymakers are actually guided by, and it's very easy to see how it's not done. So I would like to say that what you're saying, I would like to say that the social environment, social climate nexus is an obvious part of our policy mix, but I think that we still have a way to go. I think we are right now experiencing very intense energy, especially gas crisis in Europe. which has a variety of factors, and it would be for a different panel to discuss the origins of that. But we already see the impact, the social impact of that crisis, and how easy it is to forget about social investment when one pursues climate goals. I'll give you one small example. I'm dealing with the Republic of Moldova that suddenly got a huge hike in their costs of energy. And what is going to be the first impact? It's going to be the social one that's going to be felt. And it's something that we need to keep reminding ourselves that while we put together green agenda, for example, the European Green Deal, we're also discussing at the same time the transition, the fair transition, just transition from the fossil fuel past to the sustainable energy future. And we need to also realize that the time in between is going to be particularly difficult from the social agenda. So what we are trying to do in DG NEAR is to work with partners like the Council of Europe Development Bank and others on investing in education, health, jobs, training, vocational training, social housing, etc., to make sure that people don't fall through. Otherwise, we would have a big danger of that, because honestly, any transition always has winners and losers. So the green transition is going to have losers as well, and it's usually the people on the lower scale of the lower bands of the income scale. And I think it's all the more reason for us as policymakers to remember that, realize that, and very, very systematically invest in the social aspects as well.
Thank you, Katarína. Absolutely. We couldn't agree more. And the importance and the difficulty, the challenges of this transition are upon us. And indeed, we all have to work together to really make sure that the most vulnerable groups do not have this really impending doom almost befalling them. So now, turning to Masood, how does the Center for Global Development define social investment? Because that's one of the areas where, you know, the common definition is such an important aspect if we really want to do more. So what's the definition of social investment at the Center for Global Development, and what do you see as the key financing needs, and also what are the financing gaps that you have observed? And what was the impact on all of this of the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis that ensued? Masood, over to you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Thank you for giving me the chance to participate in this panel. Let me just start off by saying that I think we don't have a Center for Global Development, a unique definition for social investment. It's along the lines exactly as slow but some progress before the pandemic. And what the pandemic has done is really caused us to have a setback. And that's increased the gaps, first of all, because most low-income countries will take 4 or 5 years to even get back to where they were in 2019. So the first job, the reason the gaps are bigger is because they've been pushed back in their progress, and now they need to come back, whether it's girls or boys that are out of school who need to come back, whether it's healthcare systems that have been pushed back, and more broadly, the economic levels of incomes that have been pushed back. The second reason why the gaps are larger is because we have become more aware of certain areas where we were underinvesting before. In particular, for example, pandemic preparedness and prevention is an area where we now recognize that we have been systematically underinvesting at the country level, at the regional level, at the global level, with the horrific consequences that we saw over the last 2 years. So going forward, we really have to not only come back and invest in the things that we were already doing, but which were set back, but add on to this the global health security agenda, which is probably another 15 billion a year. And then there is the transformation of economies towards a more sustainable, low carbon future that you were just talking about. And that also puts into play an additional set of gaps. So now we have many numbers that people come out with. You know, the ILO has come out with a gap of 78 billion a year just for social protection. The World Bank has estimated that in sub-Saharan Africa alone, there's a financing gap of around $300 million a year. Others have come in with gaps for emerging markets and developing countries as a whole, which run between $1 and $2 trillion a year. So I think the numbers are all large. And this really brings us to what I hope will be the conversation in this and other panels, which is how can we leverage the different actors that are supporting countries in this effort to work more as a coherent whole so that we are not trying to do bits of siloed support, but really by joining up, by having sort of finance in common, if you like, we can achieve the kind of leveraged impact that is going to be essential for us to make any progress.
Thank you very much, Masood. Indeed, you basically reinforce the objective that we've set ourselves for the Coalition for Social Investment to do more together, but not just to do more, but as you were saying, we have to do things differently. This really, the crisis did shine a light on the cracks that we may not have seen in our systems, health system and others. So absolutely points, very, very important points. So following up on Masood's intervention, Usha, the Financing for Sustainable Development report this year says that COVID-19 could in fact lead to a lost decade for development. So how can we accelerate SDG Alliance financing to close the existing social investment gap from the point of view of UNDP? Usha?
Thank you very much, Monica. Good to see you again. It's been a long time, and thank you very much for including me on this important panel and this important conference. I couldn't agree more with the previous speakers, Masood and Katarína. You know, I think there is a sense out there that somehow we have lost time because of the pandemic. It is true, and in some ways not true. You know, we may have gone a little sideways, but I believe that we have the tools at hand to get back on track. Where UNDP has played a role to your question about, you know, how do we accelerate this financing towards, you know, SDGs? What we found out was a few things. We were part of an overall group of UN agencies, and we conducted about 124 socioeconomic impact assessments just to see what is the impact of COVID beyond what is, you know, obvious to everybody out there. And we found the following: that one of the biggest gaps was around social investment. One of the biggest needs was around the need to be intentionally inclusive in any sort of build back better sort of recovery infrastructure. And we found that the lack of access to social protection for 1.6 billion informal workers, for example, was severe. And so when we sat down and we looked at, well, what can you do? We found the following facts. One, there was no shortage of capital, really, in the world. There's no shortage of even willingness of people to put capital into these sectors. What there was, however, was a certain set of impediments to bringing finance at scale into the SDGs. One of these impediments was around awareness, knowledge, what does it mean to put finance into SDGs? The second one could be around, well, where do I put my money, even if I understand where it should be? The third could be around risk, and the fourth could be around impact measurements. So what UNDP put in place was, if you will, a set of connected dots. One was the Data Futures platform, which basically uses all the data that we gather to identify the gaps in response by countries to the pandemic. Another one was SDG investor maps, which allowed, I put together a set of bankable projects and deals that investors and lenders could put money into. A third, and very importantly, was the issue of integrity in SDG financing, meaning even if I put my money in, how do I know it's going to the goals that we have set for ourselves? And we did this through putting in place a set of standards for bondholders, private equity, enterprises, etc. The issue of integrity has become incredibly important when we look at financing for SDGs. And I think that when you start connecting the dots, UNDP and other institutions are playing a role in connecting policies, institutions, instruments, and even newer technologies to accelerate financing towards the SDGs. And so I think that if we take a step back, the goal should be bringing forth scale financing that is intentionally inclusive to sectors like health, education, livelihoods, social and justice policies, and areas like this. And I think if we put in place some of these steps and policies and instruments, we should be well on our way to at least increasing and accelerating financing into this important space. Thanks, Monica. Back to you.
Thank you, Usha. And indeed, I'm starting to hear a glimmer of hope and also very, very interesting actions on the ground. And this important point that you made about the fact that we have to be intentionally socially inclusive. We must want it. We must mainstream it, in fact. It's not enough to just say we are investing in certain sectors. And on that note, I would like to maybe have a moment of a view from the trenches and read you a quote by Ogerta Manastirliu, Minister of Health of Albania, which should be appearing, voila, on your screen. The quote reads that the government of Albania has shown a strong commitment to improving healthcare systems, but these reforms are complex and a large unfinished agenda remains. And they call, in fact, for what you were saying, Usha, coordinated investment from PDBs are key to increasing access, efficiency, and quality of healthcare services. So coordinated investment. So now going back to you, Masood, could you please share some of the main findings of the G20 high-level independent panel on financing the global commons from the report that was issued last June? And what roles should social investment play in ensuring an inclusive, sustainable, and just recovery and increasing our resilience to future shocks? Masood, back to you.
Thank you very much, Martha. So as you mentioned, we had this report that was prepared, sponsored by the G20, but prepared by an independent panel. And it looked at the issues around the financing of pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. I should say that the findings of our report and the findings of two other important reports that were done in the last year as well, international reports, all say more or less the same thing. And the conclusions are that we systematically underinvest in pandemic prevention and preparedness, and there are reasons for doing that. Some of them are good reasons, some of them are not so good reasons, but we do need to scale that up. Secondly, that the money that we do spend is fragmented, and so isn't coordinated in a way to achieve maximum impact. And thirdly, that pandemic prevention and preparedness is a strategic issue which requires not just health ministers to think about it, but a whole of government approach. So you have to have finance ministers, heads of government, all focus on this to make sure, because the consequences of not doing it right are so large and so strategic, as we have all seen over the past 2 years. So in specific recommendations, what we see is that we need to have a scaling up of financing, both through a dedicated fund that will spend about 10 billion a year to finance gaps in the system, gaps like surveillance, genomic surveillance, gaps like strengthening health systems, particularly in low and middle income countries, having a ready, ever warm facility manufacturing capability so that if there is a pandemic, we don't have the same long wait before we can get medical countermeasures out to people. So we need to have that dedicated financing, but we also see a much larger role for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response for the international financial institutions. They have financing available, but this has not been their main business. The main business, the challenges for the next decade or 2 decades require these institutions to be making global public goods more generally, climate and pandemic preparedness, a much more central part of their agenda. And finally, we also see a need to create some governance structure. We called it a Global Health Threats Board that would bring together finance ministers and health ministers in a way that they could look at the threats that are emerging and ensure that the financing and other policy measures needed to avert those threats are being put in place in good time. And as I said, all of these recommendations more or less are the ones that are being made by other panels as well. So now the challenge is to move forward. And my one plea to the people who are watching this is that there's always a tendency when you have recommendations that about spending more money or doing things differently or changing the roles of institutions, to try and do this incrementally, to push it out into the future and say, well, let's just think about it a bit more. Really, we don't have time to think about it. This is the moment. We have gone through the worst crisis in 70 years, and this is the time when there is a momentum to take some of the decisions. The longer we wait to take some of the decisions, the less likely those decisions become. So my plea would be, let's move forward, make the decisions that everybody, all the experts think are needed, and then let's be better prepared for the next pandemic, because there will be another pandemic. There is very little doubt that we're going to have another pandemic in our lifetime, probably much sooner. And so let's be sure that next time around, we can do a better job.
Thank you very much, Masood. What a strong plea, and indeed, very important points about a whole of government approach. As I was listening to you, I was thinking, how much this applies in other areas as well, in preparing actually for climate change and the acceleration of its impact. So a whole of government approach, a systematic approach, and especially prevention, preparedness, rather than reaction, and how important that is. So, and acting now. So not just do it more and better, but faster, which is another thing that we hear a lot. So now, going back to Katarína, tell us about some of the instruments that the European Commission has designed to boost social investment in Europe, and in fact doing more and accelerating action, and also what the Commission expects from public development banks in this area.
Thank you very much, Monica. Let me go back to the very strong plea of Masood, and I'm delighted to see that in the G20 context there is this high-level group on preparedness and preparing ourselves for the future pandemics. But let's pause for a second and realize we are not out of the current pandemic. I was just listening this morning as I was waking up to a podcast on there is 11 billion apparently, or by the end of this year, there's going to be 11 billion doses of vaccines. But let's not kid ourselves. The vaccines are available in the rich countries. And it was, when in the country I live in, I couldn't get my 15-year-old vaccinated. I flew to my home country and I got him vaccinated in June. A mom in Mali or elsewhere in the world may not have that chance. So while we are talking about preparedness for the next pandemics, I think we also need to realize we are not out of the current pandemic yet. And what it may very easily morph into is that it's going to be the killer of the South, while we are all going to be on third or fourth boosters. So I think that's important to realize that the equity in addressing the current pandemic, I don't think we are there yet. So what we have tried to do is really step up on the side of the European Commission, and just in the countries that are covered by this nebulous name DG NEAR, we cover countries in Eastern Europe, Western Balkans, Turkey, and the Maghreb and Mashrek countries surrounding the Mediterranean basin. We have put together very quickly, reprogrammed and directed over 4 billion euros towards addressing the immediate needs, the humanitarian needs, as well as support to the health system. And most of the money went to the economic fallout of the pandemic. And but you asked me, Monica, what we want to do better in the future with the public development banks. Well, first of all, we cannot work without you. We cannot work without the international financial institutions, without the public development banks, because we are not there doing the programs ourselves. We are a big financier of development, but we very much depend on very competent, connected, and dedicated partners like CEB and others that are participating in the summit. We have now put together something we piloted over the last 2-3 years, which is a guarantee program, a de-risking tool that offers guarantees in a number of sectors, notably also in the social sector for the green transformation, for connectivity, for SME support, agriculture, etc., where we try to de-risk the investment in reaching the SDGs and development, because as I think it was Masood or one of you mentioned, that the gaps are huge, and we all need to pull together, both official financiers and the private sector, to really reach the scale that the needs that we have the needs globally. I think it was the World Bank that estimated that it's $4 trillion US dollars that are needed annually to reach the SDGs, and I think we are far from that goal so far. So we very much hope that this new de-risking tool called European Fund for Sustainable Development, EFSD Plus, because without the plus was the pilot, is going to add to the tools that we have out there to help bring really the needed investment, including in the area of social development.
Thank you, Katarína. So that concludes our first part of the session, which was about setting the stage, looking at the challenges, and starting to see how, what instruments are out there, and also how the public development banks may contribute in this space. So now we turn and we look a bit more to the public development banks, and especially we're going to look more at building partnerships, the importance of building partnerships, and how this can help close the gap in social investment. And these include clearly not just partnership between public development banks, but partnership with key partners such as the European Commission and others. So let me now read a joint message by Carlo Monticelli, who's Governor-elect of the Council of Europe Development Bank, and Rimeriou, whom we saw earlier today, who's heading the Agence Française de Développement, that underlines our joint commitment to the coalition. The quote reads that, given the daunting and interlinked challenges that are facing us, we're proud to lead the Coalition for Social Investment. And we would like to also call on you to join us today, and let's work together for social inclusion, sustainability, and the resilience of both our economies and our societies. So do join the coalition. Let me spend a few words just about the coalition itself. It was a key outcome of the first edition of the Finance in Common Summit last year in Paris, And it was launched and is, as I was saying earlier, co-led by the CEB and Agence Française de Développement. And it brings together both sponsors, ILO, WHO, and members, including ALIDE, BOAD, Fomplata, and participants that are convinced that social investment are actually key for a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery and future. And the coalition members are aiming to work together and have agreed to work together on increasing social investment, facilitating access to financing, strengthening public-private dialogue, indeed looking at ways in which we can leverage our finance and thus contribute more than the sum of the parts to put it in a certain way. And also, in addition to doing more, doing better. So improving both the diversity and the quality of projects, investment, sharing best practices, and supporting public policies and strategies. And as we said, well, as we heard earlier in one of the sessions, in the opening session, it's not just about leveraging the financing, but it's about leveraging the knowledge. And that's one of the key elements of the joint work of the coalition. So we've been calling for other public development banks to join the coalition, but also relevant stakeholders. And on that note, I would like to give also, again, briefly the floor to Usha from UNDP. Usha?
Thank you, Monica, very much. And I enjoyed listening to the comments of the other speakers. I just want to start off to say that, you know, you're absolutely right. Governments alone cannot fulfill the obligation of social investment. I think, Masood, you called it whole of government. I mean, including public development banks and other public actors. I might take it a step further, if I may, and call it whole of society. And I think that's very important because there are non-traditional actors as well who are very well able to join in this effort of, first of all, aligning financing with SDGs, and second, accelerating finance towards them. We have one of them on our panel, Eche from TSKB, who might agree, and Monica, I'm sure you're going to call on her. But so one thing I would love to make an announcement now, if you permit me, Monica. We are absolutely delighted as UNDP to announce that we are joining the Social Investment Coalition as a sponsor and as a contributor and as someone who hopefully as a stakeholder who will provide not only valuable data and evidence to the acceleration of finance, but instruments, and both policy instruments and financial instruments in order to bridge the gap that exists between demand and supply for finance in this important space. I mean, I think we have various instruments. We support already, you know, we have boots on the ground, if you will, in 170 countries. So one of our biggest strengths is that decentralized framework that does a couple of things. One, it combines the global sort of architecture that Masood was talking about, and if you will, lands it at the level of countries in order for them to actually participate and put in place practicable roadmaps that we help them with in terms of bringing finance to the SDGs. There are things like the integrated national financing frameworks that we've put in place in, I believe, 70 or 80 countries, which basically bring together streams of finance from traditional and non-traditional actors, public, private, other, towards financing SDGs. So in this sense, I think, you know, we bring evidence and data, primary data from all the work that we do at the country level, as well as a sense of combining policy with finance, with institutional capacity building in order to increase and strengthen aligned finance to SDGs. Because just as a final comment, yes, 4 trillion a year or whatever the number is needed to bridge the gap. But you know what? There's 431 trillion of net wealth in the world today. And I think if we, as a group, we succeed in aligning that financing towards what is needed for SDGs, I think we'll be on a very good path. Back to you. Thanks, Monica.
No, but thank you, Usha, and thanks to UNDP in general, because the coalition is extremely excited to have a new sponsor. And as we said, it's not just financing, it's the knowledge, and a sponsor with such extensive knowledge and the capacity also to leverage this knowledge in order to really enact action on the ground is fundamental. So this is great news, and thank you. Now, I would like to slightly change the order because our colleague Börü has been waiting patiently, and I would like to go to her before we play a video which was foreseen at this moment. Mrs. Börü, could you tell us how the Industrial Development Bank of Turkey supports social investment and whether these objectives, the stated objectives of the coalition on trying to do more, financing more in terms of social investment and trying to do things better, resonate with your action. Ece, over to you. Now I see you.
Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm very happy to participate to event with you. As a development and investment bank, our mission is to support the sustainable and inclusive development of Turkey, firstly. In this direction, for many years, we have been working in harmony with various supranationals, DFIs and IFIs, which have innovation in sustainability. This collaboration enables us to catch up with the arising global development agenda and integrate new perspectives into our business. Our journey starting with environmental assessment, strength with the implementation of our own environmental and social assessment tool during the appraisal and monitoring of finance projects. For the last 3 years, we have been benefiting from our SDG mapping tool, which has been developed through the collaboration among IDFC parties. Last but not least, we have released our TSKB reporting, first in Turkey, and we declared our targets to incorporate climate risks in our assessment as well as in our financials by way of rating models and provisioning policies. We observed that social investment has been broadly defined by various sources. Yet the coalition made a preliminary definition of social investment stating that it encompasses financing infrastructure, complementary equipment, maintenance, as well as supporting policies, institutions, and capacity building. And it covers a wide range of sectors, including but not limited to education, health and care, social protection, housing, water sanitation, and hygiene. Traditionally, infrastructure is linked to projects producing economic and monetary value, such as mobility, utilities, communications, and energy. And however, social infrastructure is lately gaining in prominence, with its importance being highlighted by recent events like the global financial and pandemic crisis. The importance of the collaboration, partnerships, networks, and knowledge sharing between the development banks is today even more evident given the current context and needs of the societies. We are always honored to be part of the various valuable communities, such as IDFC, D20 LTIC, Global Compact, LT, UNEP FI, and TCFT. But today we are carrying the excitement to announce of being part of the Coalition for Social Investment as well. With our increasing responsibility and dedication for the better world, as being a development bank, we are ready to contribute to the coalition with our best effort and with great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Eche. We're really delighted that TSKB is also joining the coalition today. And I'm going to go back to you because you're joining because you think partnerships are indeed important, as you've stated. So can you give us an example of a flagship example of a successful partnership that TSKB actually could rely on or enacted?
And TSKB has always supported sustainable and inclusive infrastructure investment. As of today, the SDG links projects that we have financed account for nearly 90% of total loan book, varying from renewables, efficiency investments to socially inclusive projects such as women empowerment, employment mitigation, health and education areas. TSKB has a very successful partnership on specific subject, but one of the most successful one that I mentioned is Gender Working Group under IDFC. Gender Equality Working Group was established at the IDFC in 1980. Since that time, TSKB has been serving as a coordinator of Gender Equality Working Group. TSKB, AFD, IDFC Secretariat, and 10 member banks collaborate for the activities of the working group. The working group has conducted several activities addressing and supporting gender equality SDG 5. To briefly mention about these activities, in 1980, we applied a questionnaire to the volunteer members of the club to identify each other best gender-friendly practices within our institutions as well as regarding our external relations with other related parties. As a result of this study, we obtained two main conclusions. First, the importance of mainstreaming an internal gender-sensitive strategy, and second, using financial and non-financial resources to create an external impact. Both results would involve capacity building and awareness raising activities on gender equality and equity. Last year, in 2019, we have created a joint statement on gender equality and gender equity to address the importance of crucial role of development banks in promoting SDG 5. Last year, we have updated our roadmap in way to focus a third-party study on gender-based practices of IDFC. Also, during the last year's FIC Summit, the Paris Development Bank's statement on gender equality and women's empowerment was signed by voluntary development banks. Currently, there are 33 signatories of the statement. With this statement, these commit to work together on different goals and outcomes outlined in the statement. To conclude, we believe that the roadmap of the Coalition for Social Investments completely aligns with TSKB's development mission, and I'm sure collaboration between institutions under the umbrella of the Coalition will be great success to accelerate awareness, expand our capacity, and improve the social investment globally.
Thank you, Echen. So we hope as well, and indeed thank you also for focusing very strongly on gender equality and women economic empowerment as a central element that definitely then we will make sure is central in the work of the coalition. I could not agree more. So also because, I mean, social investment, how absolutely central is it for the life of women, but also not just in terms of understanding the impacts on lives of women, but also on women as actors, as agents of change in the area of social investment. So absolutely a central element. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to actually make a small transition to a video. I would like to introduce a video message by Alice Albright, Chief Executive Officer of the Global Partnership for Education, that is going to showcase as innovative financing mechanism, something that many of you have mentioned so far, to unlock new sources of funding for social investment. Play the video, please.
I'm honored to join you all today. My name is Alice Albright, and I am the CEO of the Global Partnership for Education. GPE is the world's largest global fund focused exclusively on getting every child in school and learning. But despite decades of progress, millions of children, including nearly 130 million girls, are out of school. Shutdowns and the economic impact of the pandemic mean many children who left classrooms cannot come back. Against this backdrop, GPE continues to expand our work to more than 90 of the world's poorest countries. We invest in transformational change that countries design, own, and sustain. The evidence is clear. Countries that invest more in education grow faster and lift more people out of poverty. In July, global leaders came together at the Global Education Summit in London and committed more than $4 billion towards our new strategy. But this investment alone will not solve the education crisis. Our GPE multiplier creates an incentive for partners to unlock and unblock new funding for education, including large-scale concessional lending. We've allocated $365 million to 36 countries through this innovative finance mechanism, unlocking more than $1.6 billion in new co-financing. The scale of the education crisis makes today a key moment to build on this kind of success, collaborating to crowd in finance, technical advice, and political will. I hope you will join me in applauding a shared goal of more and better investment in the world's social sectors. Thank you very much.
And thank you to Ms. Albright. And indeed, this goes very much in the sense of the plea for accelerating, doing more, doing it now, that Masood was brought to the fore earlier. And it shows how it's not just how important it is really to see all of this in an integrated fashion, in an all-government approach with multiple challenges interrelated and seeking interrelated solutions as well. So now we're gonna move to Brazil for a moment, and I would like to bring you another example of successful cooperation between public development banks to support a successful project in Brazil. I would like the quote to be brought up. The quote is by Leonardo Lima Chagas, the Ministry of Citizenship in Brazil, who says that in Brazil, Bolsa Familia and Auxílio Emergencial, co-financed by the World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, CAF, KfW, and AfD, reached a third of the country's population, 68 million people, during the COVID-19 crisis, and that the project also laid the ground for policy dialogue and on social protection and inclusive growth. So not just action, but also increased policy dialogue. And so a very good example on how we can work together and make an impact on the ground. Before I go back to the speakers for a final round, and I want to introduce another video message, short video message by the chairman of the Association of African Development Finance Institutions, whom we saw also earlier, and also the World Federation of Development Financing Institutions, Thabo Tamane, on what he sees as the role of the public development banks in supporting social investment. Please play the video.
Greetings to you all from Botswana. Let me add my voice in welcoming you to the summit and commend the AFD and the Council of European Development Bank for the leadership in the formation of the Coalition for Social Investment. You would all agree that social investment is the key to achieving the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, because the social element of the development ecosystem has bearing on the performance and success of other development structures. According to a publication of the European Commission, social investment is about investing in people. It means policies designed to strengthen people's skills and capacities and support them to participate fully in employment and social life. Key policy areas include education, quality childcare, healthcare, training, job search assistance, and rehabilitation. These are aspects that are fundamental to the work of the public development banks. The PDBs are therefore expected to focus and ensure that their interventions recognize and embed social investments. The coalition will add momentum in advocating for more and better social investments in these areas by the public development banks. Consequently, the Association of African Development Finance Institutions and the World Federation of Financing Institutions, under my chairmanship, are happy to join the coalition. I look forward to our joint effort and the partnerships of all the PDBs in growing this coalition and ensuring that we will work together to increase our financing of social investments. I thank you.
And let's thank Mr. Tamane, although virtually, and this is great news. The coalition grows, it grows across continents, and by being more, we can be stronger, but we'll have to be effective in working together, which is not always easy, as we all know. Anyway, now I'm going back to the speakers for a final round. I'm gonna go ladies first, Masood, if you don't mind, and I'll give you the last word, however. So, Katarína, let me start from you. You have 1 minute, so let's try to make it in 1 minute to identify one key constraint and one key solution for scaling up social investment. Katarína?
I think the key constraint, or one of the key constraints, is that the perception by policymakers and governments is that social investments is a cost, that social investment is something that we need to give out. And I think the solution would be, and this is something we need to work on together and with the public development banks, is to change the mindset, change the paradigm, and see social investment as a real investment. And I think that's going to be the driver of bringing more money to finance the SDGs.
Absolutely, a paradigm shift. Nothing less than a
Nothing
paradigm
less
shift.
than a paradigm shift.
Okay, well, we have our work cut out for us. Now, Usha, over to you, your key constraint and your key solution.
That's really difficult because there are rather a lot of constraints, but I'll try. Monica, I think that one key constraint from where I sit is there's money out there, okay, with interest. What there isn't enough of is a pipeline of opportunities, projects, deals that they can put their money into. And this has to be developed as a partnership between public and private entities. And the reason for that is, as Katarína just said, you know, there's all these perceptions swirling around social investment, whether it's cost or anything else. And I think deals have to be prepared. Projects have to be prepared, and I think they have to be made and formed into projects where money can come in from different sets of actors. So I think that if we combine policy, institutions, and instruments, we would be able to go a long way in addressing this impediment, which I think is rather a large one in accelerating finance to SDGs. Thanks, Monica. Back to you.
Thank you, Usha, and I couldn't agree more. And unfortunately, this challenge of the pipeline of project is something that we've been, carrying with us for many, many years in the developing world. So we need to do better. That's one of the goals, right? So now let me turn to Eche, your moment for a key constraint and a solution.
Oh, thank you. And I believe that strong collaboration among public and private investors would pave the way for sustainable recovery. With transparency and accountability, impact assessment, and especially social impact generation would bring up a multiplier effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ece. And now let me turn to Masood. You have the last word of the panelists.
Thank you very much, Javanta. I think that the biggest constraint we face is that we recognize intellectually that we need to work together, be part of an integrated whole. But it's very hard for each agency to actually step out of our comfort zone, of our own silo, our own way of thinking, and be willing to change what we do as part of being that one element in an integrated whole. And I believe that the way to accelerate that change, that mindset change in the international agencies, begins in the capitals of the countries that are the members themselves, because often in the capitals, the relationship with individual agencies is itself fragmented across different ministries that don't talk to each other. So sometimes they're not sending the same message to each of the agencies. If we want the WHO, the ILO, the MDBs, the development banks, the bilateral agencies to work together, then we have to make sure that the capitals that are sending them instructions and working with them also have that same joined up approach to dealing with the international system. So that would be my plea again, is let's join ourselves up in the capitals and then also ensure that we accelerate this approach to an integrated solution.
Thank you very much. And I have 2 minutes to wrap this up. And you just told us that as part of our agenda, we have to be agents of change to actually make everybody step out of the comfort zone and bringing people together on complex problems that need a complex and integrated solution. And we know how hard that is. So just a couple of concluding points on the coalition. I'm calling on all public development banks to join us in this challenge of being agents of change. I would like to thank all of the speakers and all of the entities that have joined the coalition today. And also, I would encourage the public development banks to respond to a survey that will be sent to them very, very shortly. We are trying to enhance knowledge on what you do, knowledge on what you mean by social investment, but also knowledge of how we can better also understand how we measure impacts and how we can have a real impact on the ground. So follow us on social media for further updates at #Coalition for Social Investment. And thank you very much.